Hey guys, and welcome to today's video where we are going to be discussing the evolution of influencer culture and recapping how the concept and perception of influencers has changed over the kind of past 10 years or so. And I decided to make this video because I recently watched Love Island and I then went and looked at some of the old Love Island cast members on Instagram, and their Instagrams are dead. Like, they have millions of followers but they get no engagement. Their posts are majority brand deals for very dodgy companies, and that got me thinking about how the concept of an influencer has drastically changed in recent years, so that the audience is no longer interested in people who just post photos after appearing on a TV show. I also watched Jordan Teresa's video called The Death of the Influencer, which is a really great video. I'll put it in the description down below. You should definitely go and watch it. It was super interesting. It talked about how people have started to kind of grow resentful towards influencers. So I decided I wanted to kind of recap all the trends throughout the past 10 years on YouTube and on Instagram, to talk about how our perceptions and how we view influencers has changed since social media became kind of a mainstream thing. So Jordan's video specifically covers why like the Instagram girlies are not getting the clicks, views and engagement that they were getting a couple of years ago. Whereas in this video I want to look more at the trends and how what we expect from influencers has changed. So this video will be different to Jordan's, and I would definitely recommend that you go and watch that one either before or after this one if you haven't already. But before we start, make sure you are subscribed, notifications on, and don't forget to leave a like on this video if you do go on to enjoy it. So to start off with, let's get the important definition out of the way. So an influencer is defined as a person with the ability to influence potential buyers of a product or service by promoting or recommending the items on social media. This is important because it specifically mentions social media. And the general influencer definition pre-social media would simply be someone who influences someone else to do something. But since social media has become such a big part of our lives, and since people have realized that they can make money from social media simply by growing a following and then posting brand deals, what we understand the term influencer to mean has kind of changed to fit that job description. And the classic definition of influencer covers the type of brand deals that celebrities have been doing for decades. Think, for example, the collaboration between Nike and Michael Jordan to create the Jordan shoes that to this day are still one of Nike's most profitable business ventures, the MAC Viva Glam collabs that featured a new celebrity every year, etc. So the idea of a famous person persuading their fans to buy something through an endorsement is not new, and it's not novel to social media. However, with social media, the way that those endorsements work has changed, because it's now less of buying something because a person that you admire is promoting it, and more of buying something because a person that you relate to is telling you and claiming that they buy it themselves and they use it and they love it. And it might not seem that different, but let's just talk about how our perception and our views on influencing have evolved over the years to give you an insight into just how much has changed from the era of mainstream celebrity to the era of the social media influencer. So the concept of an influencer as we know it now, in my opinion, started in the late 2000s. Obviously, the whole idea of someone influencing someone else to buy something has been around since like the 1700s, but the kind of social media influencers that we associate the word influencer with now, I think they mainly came from blogging. So 2004 was around the time that blogging started to become more mainstream. A lot of people from kind of all walks of life were getting into blogging, just basically talking about their general interests, whether that be makeup, fashion, sports, gaming, mummy blogs, work. Blogs gave people the freedom to talk about basically whatever they wanted, away from the prying eyes of people that they knew in their real life, should they want to keep it private from their usual social media accounts, because blogging could be done either as yourself or as someone anonymous. And blogging was an interesting phenomenon because most blogs would be run on their own websites. So there wasn't a huge platform like YouTube that was bringing kind of all bloggers together to blog in the same place, that was kind of recommending people blogs that they might enjoy. There were no algorithms that were recommending blogs to people. It was up to the readers to seek out and find the blogs while surfing the web. So actually growing an audience was a lot more difficult than it is on social media now, because there weren't things like the recommended page. And it seems weird to think about a time where if you were to post content, you had to create your own website to do it. But a lot of people did, and people started to build up sizable audiences slowly but surely, and they also started to slowly but surely see advertising offers come into their inbox. And the reason for this was that by the mid to late 2000s, audiences were starting to value the opinions of bloggers over traditional celebrities because bloggers felt more authentic and more relatable. Relatable is a term we're going to use a lot in this video, so do not take a shot every time I say relatable because you will die. What was interesting was that seemingly the bloggers' lack of celebrity status was what made them so appealing. They had no PR team telling them what to do, they weren't super rich, they weren't polluted by politics or corruption. They were simply ordinary people writing about their experiences for the entertainment of other ordinary people, and people loved it because it felt like such a breath of fresh air in comparison to what you get from celebrities who were very filtered, they were very tame, they would only say what their PR team allowed them to. However, this started to change from 2006 onwards when sponsored content became a thing. Companies developed software like pay-per-post where users would have to pay to unlock each blog post to profit from the increasing popularity of blogs run by ordinary people, but they also started to sponsor specific posts. So a makeup blog might be sponsored by a brand to review their product. And that was where the line started to blur a bit between what was authentic and what was paid for, and that was where blogs started to become more like the social media that we see now, because the audiences weren't getting necessarily an entirely authentic, opinionated voice. It could be kind of swayed by sponsored content. And MySpace was popular at this time, and we have seen people like Jeffree Star become popular influencers from generating a MySpace following. However, MySpace only tended to reward people who were particularly talented or particularly controversial, and it didn't generate the type of influencers that we're talking about in this video, and that's why I don't want to talk too much about it, because where you're only seeing either very talented or very controversial people come up on a following, it's not the same as what it was in the blogging community where pretty much everyone had access to it. The same with what we have with Instagram and YouTube and Twitch now. You know, anyone can start a channel or an account and try and grow it and become an influencer. MySpace wasn't quite like that. It was more difficult to build a following just because of the way that it worked. Social media generally had been developing in the background of the blogging trend, with Facebook and Twitter both becoming publicly available in 2006, and these platforms started to experiment with monetization strategies from 2008 and onwards. And brands originally thought that ads that were placed on social media that looked like authentic content was going to be the way forward, but they quickly realized that audiences could pick out an ad that was supposed to be disguised as authentic content just looked like an ad that was supposed to be disguised as authentic content, so people didn't engage with those ads in the way that the brands thought that they would. However, the failure of this ad strategy was what really opened the door for the blogging trend to become a widespread social media trend, because brands realized that whilst they couldn't disguise their ads as authentic content, non-commercial social media users could. So we got from that the birth of the influencer as we know it today. And it's also worth mentioning that Instagram was launched in 2010, and Instagram is primarily the platform that we now associate with the term influencer. So this launch, coinciding with brands realizing that promotions through social media users was the next big thing in marketing, kind of created the perfect storm for influencing as a career to really take off. And one group of people who were absolutely pivotal in showcasing how valuable Instagram was as a marketing tool was, love them or hate them, the Kardashian Jenners. This group of sisters, known for absolutely nothing other than being famous for no reason, were a prime example of what Instagram could do for marketers. Instagram was different to other social media networks in that it was less obvious when something was being paid for. With celebrity endorsements, it was very obvious that money had changed hands, but on Instagram, where people were sharing every aspect of their lives, it was quite hard to tell whether they genuinely did love a product or whether they'd been paid for it. And the Kardashians' lack of talent was the reason why they were the pioneers of Instagram as an influencer marketing platform, because they were not traditional celebrities famous for doing something. So they were more willing and able to show all aspects of their lives to their fans and seamlessly integrate brand promotion into that, because they weren't conscious of having to maintain a particular image, because all of their lives was already being shown on Keeping Up with the Kardashians. They were already known because of this TV show, but social media was what really catapulted them to the level of fame that we know them at today, because they were showing more of their lives than other celebrities, and therefore fans felt more connected to them and almost more related to them because they were famous for no reason. They were basically just ordinary people who happened to be put on this TV show and end up being super famous, and they didn't really change as people as a result of that, or at least not in the early days. I think it was the combination of their kind of reach and their authenticity and their connection with their fans that really lit the light bulbs over a lot of marketers' heads. Like, here was this group of people who you could pay a flat sum to, and they would produce content that promoted your brand without you having to actually do any of the production of that content yourself. On top of that, they had a very loyal fan base, and you could actually calculate from their social media pages exactly how many people were likely to see the endorsement and pay accordingly. An example of why this was so appealing to marketers that I found is this comparison between how much Kim Kardashian was paid per Instagram post versus how much Taylor Swift was paid for an ad campaign with Coca-Cola that Coca-Cola had to produce themselves. The difference in price makes it easy to see why so many brands adopted influencer marketing into their advertising strategy, because why wouldn't they, when they can reach millions of people guaranteed and pay a fraction of the price they would pay for an A-lister whose campaign reach can't be qualified until it's actually already gone out. It just seemed to make more sense to buy into these guaranteed ad reaches than to spend thousands of dollars on creating endorsements that you then have to pay millions of dollars to celebrities for when you have no idea how much it will actually boost the brand. Like, don't get me wrong, celebrity endorsements were still well and truly thriving, and we still see celebrity endorsements now, they haven't gone away, but there was a definite shift from celebrity endorsements to celebrity collaborations. For example, Kate Moss, who was like the biggest supermodel in the world, she had a collection with Topshop. She didn't just model for them, she actually put her name on those clothes. Rather than being an endorsement, it was a collaboration. Brands seem to collaborate more with celebs to create a product that fans could buy because there was a newer, shinier, better way to advertise on social media than through celebrities. Brands also quickly clocked on that they could target a very specific audience through the use of micro-influencers. Think about it like this: if you pay, say, $10,000 to an influencer with 100,000 followers, you're paying $10K for probably half of their audience or less to be interested in the product itself because of the variation in traits between each audience member. You know, not everyone in that audience is going to be interested in the same things, so paying that influencer with those 100,000 followers is not going to get you 100,000 new sales because not everyone's going to be interested. Whereas if you target an influencer who has 10,000 followers who does a very specific thing, so say for example you're a makeup brand, if you pay an influencer with 100k followers to promote your makeup, you know, maybe 20,000 of them will be interested. If you pay a makeup influencer with 10,000 followers to promote your makeup, all 10,000 are going to be interested because that's the only thing that they do. So you know for a fact that all their followers are there for the makeup content, and therefore you can guarantee that if they're paid to promote a makeup product, you will reach 10,000 potential customers. And because they have only 10k followers, you can pay them less. You can pay them like a tenth of what you would pay the influencer with 100,000 followers. So brands were thinking, okay, well the best thing that we can do is find 10 influencers with 10,000 followers and pay them $1,000 each and get 100,000 followers worth of reach rather than pay the influencer with 100k. And when you work this out with like the difference between what you can pay a micro influencer versus a major influencer, for brands in very specific spaces, it's actually more worth their while to use micro influencers and pay multiple of them to promote their product instead of choosing only one major influencer, because the product is guaranteed to reach the right audience and it's much easier to predict how many sales you might get because you can calculate with more accuracy how many of their followers might be interested. And this worked well in combination with a number of technologies that were coming out which could analyze audience data and engagement to give an accurate picture of a demographic that a promotion would reach if a certain influencer posted it, because the demographics were more consistent with micro influencers than they were with major influencers like the Kardashians. And also I think it's worth mentioning that at this point people were wowed by follower counts. Nowadays it's more about engagement. Quite quickly people realized that they could just buy followers and then get promotions offered to them, but once brands realized that people were doing that, they're now more interested in, okay, what's your percentage engagement rate and whether it's worth investing in that rather than the follower count. And this was an important point in the evolution of influencer marketing, because this was a point where being an influencer as a career in itself started to become a real thing. Whilst the Kardashians popularized the idea of influencers on social media, they were at this time primarily known for their TV show. They hadn't just come up via Instagram. They were becoming kind of major celebrities, but they were also showing how effective social media was as an advertising platform, and so more people were trying to get into it because more people wanted to be like them. And when brands started paying micro-influencers to do promotions for them, that's when we get people starting to do social media, and only social media, as their main career. And we will come back to the idea of using micro-influencers in a bit, but I want to talk now specifically about YouTube, because I think the evolution of trends on YouTube has shaped the type of influencers that we see on social media. A lot of YouTubers who were well known in the early days of YouTube started as bloggers, especially in the makeup and the lifestyle communities. Think, for example, Zoella, Sprinkle of Glitter, and they quickly built up a very large young female audience. I think the primary example of what influencer culture was like in the early 2010s is the Brit Crew. This was a group of friends and like adjacent acquaintances who were all well known on YouTube and all made the same types of videos. The primary members of the Brit Crew were Zoe Suggs / Zoella, Alfie Days / Pointless Blog, Joe Suggs / That's Joe, Casper Lee, Marcus Butler, Naomi Smart, Tanya Burr, Jim Chapman, and Louise Pentland / Sprinkle of Glitter. And the adjacents were Louis Cole, Ollie White, the Maynard Brothers, Josh Peters, Dan and Phil, Troy Sivan, Tyler Oakley, Connor Franta, My Name's Che, and a number of others who I have no doubt I've probably forgotten, but the ones that I'd listed were the main members of the group. And I would regard this entire group of people as being the pioneers of what influencer culture on YouTube was like in kind of 2012 to 2014, because they were so prominent on the platform and their content was so similar. Like generally each of these YouTubers would have a main channel where they would post challenges, collabs with their friends, pranks, and generally kind of low effort content that to a viewer kind of felt like you were just watching a few friends hanging out. And they would also have a second channel which would be dedicated to daily vlogging. The daily vlogs had such a hold on society in 2014, like I can't even explain it. If you weren't there, you won't understand. But every single one of the primary Brit Crew members would post a video on their vlog channel every single day of just them kind of going about their life. Like they weren't like the vlogs that we saw in kind of 2015, 2016, where they were planned, they were fast-paced, they were explosive, they had like little bits in them. They weren't like David Dobrik vlogs where he would plan like a big thing for each vlog. They were literally just these people living their lives and filming it. And I would say the culture at this time on YouTube was that if you were either A, posting gaming videos, B, posting videos with your friends, or C, showing your entire life, you would generally be able to build up an audience because that was what viewers expected. And it's interesting because I do think that at this point, even though these vloggers were presenting themselves as your friends, you were seeing everything that they were getting up to in the day, actually their content was very filtered, it was very family friendly, and they obviously were very careful about what they said on camera to make sure that they kind of never really stepped into adult territory in their videos. And I would guess that the reason for this was that the average YouTube viewer at this time was aged 11 to 14. There wasn't much of an adult audience on YouTube, so anyone who wanted to create content for a living needed to tailor that content to that audience. And this in turn created a culture of quite tame, but also quite easy to make content. You can't really imagine nowadays someone filming a chubby bunny challenge with their friend, editing it on iMovie on their phone, and then getting 10 million views for it. But that's just what YouTube was like back then, and because no one was making highly produced, high quality content, viewers just expected low effort stuff, and it was very easy for these popular YouTubers to make a ton of money by filming videos every day because no one was expecting them to do like really high quality editing. No one was expecting film style production. They were literally expecting to sit down and watch two people do like a dumb challenge for 10 minutes and then wait until the next week to see the next one. And if the videos only take an hour to edit, it's not that difficult to post every day, whereas nowadays viewers expect so much more that daily vlogging is basically impossible if you also want to make high quality content that people will actually watch. Like there are some channels that will upload like multiple times a day, but the content is so low effort, low quality, very minimal editing that it just doesn't cut it on YouTube and it doesn't get the views, because people would rather nowadays wait longer for a better quality video than see a low quality video every day. And at this time, these YouTubers were seen as these like golden people who could do absolutely nothing wrong. Although as the internet evolved, they did start to get into more scandals around 2015 onwards, which I'm not going to get too much into because a lot of these people I've already made individual videos about them. So if you want to know more about their scandals, you can go and watch those videos. They'll be in a playlist in the description called Where Are They Now? But I thought it was worth mentioning anyway how they were seemingly untouchable in these early years of YouTube, but once YouTube as a platform really started to explode in the mid-2010s and become a lot more popular, it had a negative impact on the reputation of these daily vloggers because their content just didn't cut it anymore. And I also want to talk about the marketing tactics here, because these guys, they didn't tend to do sponsored videos in the same way that YouTubers do nowadays, where there's a sponsor segment, and instead they would work with companies to make their own products, including books. Like every single one of those YouTubers had on that list had a book with no reason for them to have a book, but they had a book. They had advent calendars, makeup lines, events. They had their fingers in a lot of pies, and I think that was probably because we were still in the era where celebrity endorsements were more collaborations than sponsorships. So then when these people became super famous, everyone was like, oh, well, they should do collaborations as well. And if you go back and watch their videos, they don't necessarily talk much about sponsorships. I don't know if some of the videos were sponsored, particularly Zoella's like Primark hauls that she do very often. Maybe she was sponsored by Primark, I don't know. But most of their content was not sponsored in the way that we see it now. And it's interesting because whilst Instagram was moulding into being the perfect platform for sponsored posts, brands seemingly weren't looking to sponsor YouTubers yet, and instead they would be more likely to be approached by brands who wanted to make profit by putting a YouTuber's name on a product or having a YouTuber feature in something for them. And this started to change from around 2015 onwards, when YouTube started to split up into more distinct communities. So you had like the DIY lifestyle girlies, the gaming YouTubers, the beauty gurus, the vloggers, etc. And with more variety of content available, those YouTubers who'd been massively popular in the early 2010s started to see their channels become more stagnant because people had more high quality content to choose from. And this, I think, was partly because of the increasing content available. Like, people started to put more effort into their content to try and stand out and draw the audience to them instead of their competitors. Like, a chubby bunny challenge just wouldn't cut it anymore when there was a wealth of content that was based on more interesting ideas with better production and better editing. And don't get me wrong, like, we weren't out of the low effort era yet, and there was definitely still a lot of people making challenge videos, but those videos tended to need a little bit more about them to draw a viewer in than what the original Brick Crew was offering. And I now want to divert away from the evolution of YouTube trends and content to talk more about influencer marketing, because this was where it really started to take off in a way that we hadn't seen yet. YouTubers are now being recognized by brands as a goldmine for sponsored content, particularly in the makeup community. One brand that exemplifies exactly what was happening in the timeline at this point is Morphe. I don't think any of you will be surprised to hear that Morphe were the kind of pioneers of influencer marketing. Morphe were a relatively unknown makeup brand. They started out by doing private labeling, so they would buy wholesale palettes, put their name on it, and then sell them as their products. So they weren't doing anything new or anything different, but as a marketer, Morphe was probably the smartest brand out there. Morphe, from the beginning, invested a ton of money into sponsoring influencers. They would send their products to various beauty gurus to review in videos. And remember what we said about the value of a micro-influencer with a very narrow demographic. And they also gave those influencers affiliate codes. The affiliate codes were a stroke of genius because the rules around influencer advertising were not fully fleshed out yet. So influencers were incentivized to give overly positive reviews of their Morphe products because they could then offer their fans an affiliate code, which the fans didn't know was an affiliate code, giving them 10% off if that fan went and bought that product. So actually what was happening was the influencer was making a commission without the fan knowing that they were making a commission. So fans were watching these videos and thinking, oh my god, Morphe's the best brand ever because everyone loves them, like I need to buy a Morphe palette, would then use their favorite influencer's code, because why would you not when you can get 10% off, and not realize that by doing that they were putting money in that influencer's pocket. And also Morphe were guaranteed massive sales from these guaranteed good reviews because they knew that influencers were not going to slag them off when they could make money from it. So everyone was giving them really, really positive reviews, and all of their fans were lapping it up and buying tons and tons of Morphe products. And 2015 to 2017 was just a different era to what YouTube had been up to that point, because family-friendly, overly filtered content was not satisfying audiences anymore. The 12 to 14-year-olds who had been avidly watching YouTube in 2012 were now like 14 to 16 to 18, and they wanted something that felt more raw and more authentic. They wanted to see things that felt more real, and so we got the rise of commentary channels, YouTube groups, and creators who were generally unfiltered, who were not worried about saying or doing controversial things, think like PewDiePie or KSI. They were suddenly reaching multiple millions of subscribers, whilst the family-friendly counterparts who'd started their channels at the same time were not seeing much growth. However, in 2017, the bubble did start to burst, not just because people realised that these beauty gurus were way too enthusiastic about Morphe and therefore there must be something fishy going on, but also because the infamous Fyre Festival massively changed how audiences viewed influencer sponsorships. Up until this point, people were quite naive and would generally believe that if an influencer was promoting a product, then they must genuinely like it and believe in it, and because of this, influencer marketing was a $1.7 billion industry by the end of 2016. However, Fyre Festival gave a massive dose of reality to audiences and regulators about what was actually going on behind the scenes. So Fyre Festival, of course, was the absolute disaster where the organisers decided to set up this festival on a tropical island, pay a ton of influencers like Kendall Jenner to promote it, and promised that it was going to be this event full of famous faces and the luxuries that you don't normally get at a festival. But once the $2,500 a ticket guests arrived, they found a few marquees, rolls with slices of plastic cheese on them. Also, I know that this is not plastic cheese, but there is no way that a cheese can naturally be that shiny, so I refer to this as plastic cheese. They had an absolute nightmare because it was nothing like what it was promised. There was no music, no celebrities, no accommodation, no one who knew what was going on, and no flights home. It was a complete and utter disaster. And what the real kicker for people was, though, was that all of the celebrities who had promised that they would be there never turned up. They must have known in advance that the festival was doomed and it was never going to deliver what it had promised, so they didn't actually go. And this highlighted how influencers were happy to take sponsorship opportunities for brands they didn't actually believe in, and they were happy to take opportunities even if they weren't confident in the product that they were promoting and convincing their fans to buy. This not only alerted fans to the fact that influencer promotions were not necessarily as authentic and genuine as they thought they were, but it also alerted the regulators, and the FTC introduced much stricter guidelines regarding disclosure of sponsorships, which meant that the kind of golden era of seamlessly integrating undisclosed sponsorships into what seemed like ordinary content was over. And salt was only further rubbed into the wound when PewDiePie caused the adpocalypse on YouTube by displaying massively anti-Semitic material in a video, leading to a ton of big brands pulling their ads from YouTube to prevent their products appearing alongside controversial content. This, I think, had been building for a long time. Brands were starting to become more frustrated with the lack of regulation of YouTube content, and when one went, they all then decided to follow, and this massively harmed every single YouTuber's CPM as the platform scrambled to recover to try and bring more advertisers in, because suddenly there just was not enough ads to go around all the content that was on the platform. This was just kind of the breaking point of something that had been building up for a long time, and it would change YouTube because YouTube themselves were like, oh shit, we need to do something about this. So following these two disastrous events, influencer culture kind of turned on its head. Uncontroversial content was back in, and influencers had to be far more careful about who they collaborated with to ensure that they didn't appear as a sellout and turn their fans against them. Think Kenzo Cosmetics, that was a complete scam. Gabby, Hannah and Tana Moja got paid a lot of money for it, but their fans massively lost trust in them because they had promoted this scam brand. YouTube also started to crack down on what people could and couldn't do and say in videos in order to turn ads on, and thus the creators who built their platform on shock value struggled more to build an audience, paving the way for the era of relatability. And I've already spoken about this in my video about Emma Chamberlain, but between the end of 2016 and the start of 2018, she was massively influential in the type of content that was popular on YouTube. People had an appetite for down-to-earth influencers who were not afraid to show every aspect of their life, and Emma was the pioneer in that movement. Audiences were becoming much less interested in seeing the perfect lives of beauty gurus and Instagram models who only really showed off the good stuff and always seemed to be doing something that would make their followers jealous. And they were more interested in content like Emma's that wasn't afraid to be open and vulnerable and make fun of the perfect people, and was also a lot closer to what those people saw themselves as. You know, people related a lot more to Emma Chamberlain than they did to someone like Tammy Hembrow, who was constantly going on brand trips and receiving free products, because people just didn't relate to that. And it's weird because there's never really been a point when everyone was super into Instagram models and what they offered in terms of photos and style inspiration. They've just kind of been brewing in the background this whole time. They've built their platform slowly but surely without any kind of major spikes or dips. And then suddenly in 2017 to 18, when Emma was gaining 1 million subscribers a month, everyone realized that they actually didn't care that much for the Instagram models, who weren't really offering them anything other than the desire to live the life that they have. And the Instagram girls, they were definitely a branch off from the Tumblr girls of like 2013 to 14, who took aesthetic photos and appeared in the background of every single inspirational quote posted to Instagram in that time. But the popularity of those influencers had grown at a slow and steady pace over a number of years. It's kind of difficult to pinpoint where they really started to become popular, or at least it's not as easy to pinpoint where they became popular as it is to pinpoint where they started to become unpopular. This reality hit home when Emma moved to LA, and a lot of her fans were genuinely upset because they felt like she changed, because she was feeding into the influencer culture that existed there. Like, everyone's friendships were formed for business rather than out of a genuine connection, and her fans just didn't want that for her. And LA has always been the centre of US influencer culture, and it definitely produces a very toxic environment because everything is about followers and money. It seemed like everyone who got big online in the US would move to LA, but a fair few people have come out and said that actually living in LA was awful, and they hated how competitive and toxic it was and how no one actually cared about anything but followers. I think the realities of LA influencer culture are definitely well demonstrated by the whole Bi-Sister debacle. Those people were all real life friends because it benefited them, and when things went wrong, it then became more beneficial to gather evidence and expose someone else rather than be friends with them. And I do think Bi-Sister changed YouTube forever for multiple reasons that I'm not going to get into, which is not so relevant for this video. I might talk about it if I can bring myself to talk about Bi-Sister for the 407th time. But either way, the fact that these three people who were seemingly close friends were suddenly more than happy to go at each other's throats and throw each other under the bus for a couple of million views showed how cutthroat influencer culture had become between those at the very top of the game. And in terms of content, Instagram was well and truly thriving, with hundreds of thousands of people becoming Instagram influencers as their careers. And it's really interesting to me how when I say an Instagram influencer, immediately your mind will jump to a female Instagram model, because in actual fact there are a lot of male influencers, and there's a lot of people who don't specialize in Instagram who are still influencers. So for example, Twitch streamers and YouTubers, they are influencers, but they wouldn't call themselves that because the term influencer has a very negative connotation. I think this is probably because people who primarily post on Instagram don't have another name for themselves, and whilst the evolution of YouTube has required people to post more high quality content and develop better editing skills and creative ideas to become successful, they have kind of shaken the label that YouTubers have no talent, whereas that label is still very much attached to the Instagram models and therefore the term influencer. I don't know if this is because Instagram models are compared to real models who walk in runways and do editorial and commercial shoots and work for high-end brands, and people therefore can point to that and say, well, Instagram models are just like a knockoff version of these actual models who need talent to get booked and walk in shows, whereas Instagram models just need to have a nice background, a pretty face, and a camera. And the problem with that is that a lot of people can do that, and it begins to become tired when you don't offer anything different to every other Instagram influencer. I definitely think this has become a problem as Instagram has become more popular and more people want to be influencers on Instagram, because there is so much content out there that it's really difficult to stand out if all you're doing is posting pictures of yourself looking nice. The best example of this, I think, is to look at the Instagram accounts of ex-Love Island contestants a year or two after their season of the show. Like, whilst on the show, they get hundreds of thousands of followers based on their personalities that they show while they're in the villa, but once they come out, their Instagram becomes entirely their face and people get bored. Like, they go from getting 100,000 likes per post to less than 10,000 despite having over 1 million followers, because people get bored when those influencers aren't offering anything unique anymore. And this is why we see people on YouTube catapulting themselves into actual celebrities and household names, but we don't see the same from other platforms, with the exception of Molly May, because she was on a TV show and she does have a YouTube channel, so I don't think she's necessarily just like an Instagram model. But people like Emma Chamberlain, James Charles, Liza Koshy, they would have never been invited to the Met Gala if all they did was post on Instagram. Audiences now, they want personality, they want to see your USP, they want to know what makes you unique. And seeing people like James and Emma and Liza attending the most exclusive celebrity event of the year kind of hit that fact home that YouTube is the place to be if you want to make yourself famous from social media. Don't get me wrong, their invitation and their attendance was not well received in the first year. However, once they'd broken the mold and been invited more than once, there was less opposition to them the next year. Like, there were still people who were saying, why are these people being invited? But in 2022, Emma was like one of the stars of the red carpet and of the whole show because of her interviews. Like, people were watching her interviews and saying, yes, invite her back next year because we like her. Whereas she, 2, 3, 4 years ago, everyone was like, why on earth was she invited? Like, who even is she? However, back to the timeline, and 2020 was definitely a very bad year for influencers. COVID-19 was not good for influencer reputation or branding. Up until this point, people were kind of liking the content of people going out doing things, letting the audiences in on their life and showing them like the luxuries of what being an influencer gets you. But once COVID hit, the huge gap in privilege between the influencer and the ordinary person who was watching them became abundantly clear. A lot of LA influencers were not prepared to give up their lifestyle for the good of everyone else, and they continued to party and go out and post about it without a care for the lockdown or the rules that had been imposed to keep people safe. And this obviously pissed off the rest of the world, who were doing their best to abide by the rules for everyone else's benefit, and it started to give influencers as a whole a bad rep because people who were partying were some of the most well-known names in the industry. It also didn't help that influencers as a whole, they had to continue posting in order to make money, but people just were not interested in seeing it. They were posting pretty photos in huge houses, in gorgeous locations, because they needed to in order to continue doing their job. But they were doing so whilst ordinary people were struggling to make ends meet, or were losing their jobs, or were locked inside living situations that were not ideal or safe. And it just highlighted the massive differences between the influencers and their audiences, which a lot of people took their posting during this time to be tone deaf because they didn't really understand why influencers needed to rub in their faces that they were living amazing lives even in lockdown, whilst everyone else was in a time of struggle. And I'm not defending the influencers here. I do think a lot of them really could have handled this a lot better than they did, but I'm just kind of highlighting that this is where we start to see influencer fatigue. And the disgruntlement during the pandemic, I think, has and will have a lasting impact on influencer culture because it has massively reduced the interest of people in influencers who are just showing off their amazing lives. Having been through a global pandemic and realised how fragile most people's income and lifestyles are, people are just less entertained by content like brand trips or flexing or travel vlogs because the massive gap in privilege has been highlighted and remains in people's minds. And this is not meant to be in a negative connotation, but I do think a lot of people watch this and they envy these influencers. Like, I watch it and I'm like, I want that lifestyle, but you just can't achieve that with an ordinary job. And it then becomes frustrating because it's like, why does this person get to do all of these things when all they do is post pictures on Instagram? That's, I think, where we start to get the fatigue from, because people just don't understand why these people deserve to live so much better lives than them when they don't feel like they work as hard as them. And the pandemic also led to brands cutting down on their spending on influencer marketing because people generally were just cutting back spending on non-essentials. So why would you spend money paying an influencer to promote your product when their followers have no money to buy it? And in 2019, influencer marketing as an industry was worth $8 billion, and it's predicted to be worth $15 billion by the end of 2022. However, there was a definite dip in sponsored content during the pandemic, and I feel like brands started to refine who they sponsored during this time because they wanted to make sure that their sponsorships were really hitting home with people who reflected their values and would generate significant sales for them rather than just sponsoring like anyone. However, the current cost of living crisis and the recession happening across the world is once again alerting people to just how far detached most influencers are from normal life. Because whilst people who work 40 hours a week are struggling to make ends meet, people who post 30 seconds of videos of them dancing are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and it just doesn't feel fair. I think feelings of injustice are definitely one reason why people have started going off influencers, because we've started asking ourselves, why is it fair that someone who was born attractive gets to make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year at age like 21 from posting photos and videos of themselves just because they got lucky in the gene pool, whilst the rest of us have to work 40-hour weeks on minimum wage and will still struggle to buy a house before we're 30. And this is not me saying like I hate influencers, I'm not talking from like my personal perspective, but this is just like the general kind of feeling amongst the non-influencer society. Like, people go out and get degrees just to do entry-level jobs and earn like $20,000 a year, whilst being an influencer only requires a smartphone and an internet connection. And it's not the influencer's fault, but constantly seeing the lifestyles that their photos on Instagram and their videos on TikTok pay for definitely helps to breed these feelings of kind of envy and disdain. I feel like TikTok has massively changed the world of influencing because it's hugely changed what audiences expect and enjoy and how audiences engage with creators. TikTok as a platform does not promote creator and viewer relationships because of the way it shows you videos. You can follow someone and only ever see one or two of their videos on your For You page, and following someone basically means nothing on TikTok because it doesn't guarantee that you will see their content in your feed in the same way that a subscription on YouTube guarantees you'll see their content on your feed. It's harder for TikTokers to build a genuine connection with their audience because they don't know how many of their followers will actually see their videos versus how many of the views on their videos are coming from people who are just scrolling through their For You page. And this, I think, is why you will see massive variations in the amount of views that a TikToker will get on their videos, and generally their views compared to their followers will be quite low because there's no guarantee that those followers are going to see the content. Like, if you go on TikTok, you will find hundreds and thousands of people who have hundreds of thousands of followers or even millions of followers that you've never even heard of, because the way that the algorithm works, it has generated so much quick growth for so many people that it's impossible to keep up with them all. So, you know, you might think, oh wow, I've got 1 million followers on TikTok, but actually, in the grand scheme of things, that does not mean nearly as much as 1 million followers on YouTube, because the value of a follower is much less on TikTok when people can see one video and follow you and never see any of your videos again. So unless you are kind of one of the members of the hype house, TikToks don't create fame in the same way that YouTube does, because people are more likely to follow someone on TikTok because of how the algorithm works and because their videos are not going to clog up your For You page. You're not seeing stuff exclusively from people you follow, so a follow means a lot less and people will hand them out more generously. Whereas it takes a lot more to convince someone on YouTube to follow you. Like, on TikTok, you can see 30 seconds of someone and choose to follow them. On YouTube, you need to dedicate like 10 to 20 minutes of your time to watching their content to decide whether you want to watch more of their content. And generally people won't subscribe after watching one video, they'll need to watch like 2 or 3 before they decide that they like you enough to subscribe. So when you get that follow, it means more than when you get a follow on TikTok. And this has resulted in people with millions of followers on TikTok doing meet and greets and no one turning up. Like, if you had millions of subscribers on YouTube and you did a meet and greet, at least a few hundred, if not like 1,000 people will come to meet you. Like, TikTok just doesn't generate the same audience loyalty that YouTube does. And I feel like that's partly down to the length of the videos, because how much can you really get to know about someone from 30 seconds of them dancing? a lot less than what you can get to know about someone from 30 minutes of them talking on YouTube. And TikTok has massively reduced people's attention spans, and whilst video essays are still popular on YouTube, there is starting to be a shift towards shorter, snappier content. There is obviously also YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels, which are attempting to recreate the TikTok format and the success of TikTok on other platforms, which is only further encouraging people to only make short form content to appease the audience's love for TikTok. TikTok also, it's not monetizable in the same way that YouTube is. It does have a creator fund, but because of the length of the videos, you can't make nearly as much as you can from a YouTube video. So unless you're getting millions of views on every single video, you're basically taking home like £30 a year. So a lot of TikTokers try and build their Instagram alongside their TikTok so that they can post sponsored content on Instagram to make money, which has led to Instagram becoming clogged with posts from people who exclusively use it to make brand deals, which is not what their followers want to see. It's hard to strike a balance between authentic content and sponsored content when you only have one monetized platform, but the increasing frequency of sponsored posts on Instagram from reality stars, TikTokers, Instagram models, and anyone else who is limited to just that one platform is causing audience fatigue. They're seeing the same products being promoted by very similar people, and it gets boring after a while. So either they're going to hit unfollow on a large proportion of those people, or they're just going to stop engaging with their posts, which is going to damage the brand deal prospects of those TikTokers, Instagram models, and reality stars. And this is exactly what's happened with the Love Island cast that I mentioned earlier. Their posts become stale once they're out of the video and are exclusively on Instagram, because they aren't offering anything different to anyone else. And I do think that the concept of influencers, it is kind of starting to die now, particularly on Instagram, because of this boredom and this fatigue of people seeing the same content over and over again. There's only so many pictures you can see of people stood in the same pose on the same beach in Dubai before you hit the unfollow button on at least some of them. And the era of YouTube creating actual celebrities also seemingly is over. Everyone who has become a mainstream name following a successful YouTube career had started their channel in 2016 or earlier, and we just aren't seeing people coming through the ranks in the same way. Think Emma Chamberlain, James Charles, David Dobrik. We just aren't seeing people reaching those levels and replicating their success and mainstream fame from YouTube if they didn't start early. Instagram, it is still thriving, but there's so many people with hundreds of thousands of followers that it's kind of impossible to stand out. There's always going to be someone else doing the same thing as you, so convincing brands to sponsor you instead of sponsoring someone else is always going to be difficult, especially for fashion influencers, because the big brands want to work with people who are already well known for something else rather than just Instagram. There will always be dodgy brands who are willing to pay. However, finding reputable brands to work with is more difficult. So take for example the Kardashians, where they post these scams where they ask you to follow like 70 people for the chance to win a ton of designer stuff. That's a dodgy sponsorship, but they probably paid millions of dollars, and the Kardashians know that they're not going to lose their audience from doing that. For micro-influencers and influencers at like 100k to 1 million, taking dodgy sponsorships like that is much more likely to damage your reputation amongst your audience. Influencers who are up and coming don't necessarily want to do that because they want to keep their audience loyal and make sure that they are continuing to grow their career, so then it becomes more difficult to make money when you can only take reputable sponsorships and there are less of those around because of the amount of people on the platform. There's also the issue that people have a lot of choice of who they follow, and if your content is the same as 50 other people, they're only going to choose to follow one of you. So not only is there more competition for sponsorships, there's also way more competition for followers if you can't bring followers over from another platform. I think the main reason for this is we've become so used to the idea that being a YouTuber or being an influencer is a real job that will earn you a lot of money, that every other person growing up now wants to be an influencer of some kind. And there are just too many people for there to really be a standout candidate who could quickly grow through the ranks and get tens of million followers and become one of these celebrities. It's almost a kind of catch-22 where people who started their internet careers between the late 2000s and the mid 2010s had to fight tooth and nail to be taken seriously, but now that they've managed to legitimize content creation as an industry, too many people are trying to get into it for anyone to receive the kind of recognition that those big players have. This also makes it really difficult to be original enough to have the explosive growth that someone like Emma Chamberlain did, because YouTube has been around now for a long time, that whatever you do, chances are someone else has already done it or something similar to it before you. And it also is difficult when there's people like Mr. Beast who are spending insane amounts of money on their content, because how can an ordinary person who is starting their channel in 2022 able to compete with someone who has millions of dollars available to spend on making the most exciting and the highest quality content possible? They can't, and it limits what a new creator can do in order to grow their channel. And growing a channel is difficult in certain spaces like lifestyle if you don't have the money to spend on trips or interesting experiences or products to show on that channel. Every so often we do see a new type of video go viral and start a trend and boost the creator who had the idea. So for example, recently Jenny Nicholson's video about the Vampire Diaries and Mike's video about the Pretty Little Liars series, they are iconic, they are original, and I'm now seeing a lot of people copying especially the visual format that they used with pictures and the strings, and those kind of long form reviews of TV and film are starting to become a lot more popular on the platform. But these new and original ideas are the exception, and most of the time people are trying to make it on YouTube with ideas that have already been done, hoping that people will subscribe for their personality. But in this day and age when there's so much content available, that doesn't hit the same anymore. In terms of what might come next, I don't really know. I think there will come a point where you just can't spend more money to make something better, because it will just become like an actual film or TV show. Especially having seen the increased popularity of these content recaps of TV shows and film, that they are basically entirely focused on the personality of the person that does it and their passion for that particular film or TV show. Like if I wanted to watch Pretty Little Liars, I could go and do that, but I would much rather spend 6 hours watching Mike's recap of it because I find him funny and I like his personality, instead of watching 100 hours of Pretty Little Liars episodes. But personality based content on YouTube I think will always be trendy, and in the battle between personality and ideas, I think personality will eventually win, but for now we are definitely seeing idea-based content in its prime of popularity. There will come a point though where audiences are desensitized to the amounts of money being spent on this content though. Like the more times you see a title with $100,000 in it, the less impressive that sum of money is going to seem. And there will come a point where it's just impossible to spend more on content to make it better. In terms of Instagram, I think brands will continue to invest in advertising on it, but it will become more difficult for influencers to secure those sponsorships because there are just too many people to compete with, that the chance of you securing that sponsorship is like 0.01%. Like I feel like we aren't seeing Instagram influencers coming through the ranks the same way we did a couple of years ago with people like Summer Rae or Sierra Sky, Wolfie Cindy. They are in an era of Instagram where people were gaining millions of followers for literally just looking nice, whereas nowadays that just doesn't cut it anymore. And I think it is very difficult for people to break into those ranks now because Instagram content, just in general, is starting to become a bit stale. And we've seen this with the interest and the massive popularity of Be Real. People want to see real things. They want to see what people are up to. They don't want to see you posting overly edited luxury aspirational content. They want to see what you're doing right now. And I do think that we're going to start seeing the depopularization of these overly filtered Instagram accounts that only post things that look amazing in favor of people who post things that seem more real. And I haven't really talked about Twitch in this video. Twitch has become much more popular in probably the last 3 years, but I think it's definitely harder to grow on Twitch than anywhere else because you have to stream so much to even just get a couple of viewers. And without money for a decent setup, even if you get those few viewers, it's really hard to convince them to stay. I imagine that Twitch will continue to be popular. It isn't showing any signs of slowing down, but it is quite limited in terms of the content that does like especially well on Twitch. If you don't play Minecraft or FIFA or have an audience that you can transfer from another platform to Twitch, then it is very difficult to gain a following. So I don't think that Twitch is going to be like the new platform for people to start coming up on, but it is definitely becoming more popular in the background. And overall, influencer culture has changed a lot over the past few years, and I've personally found it very interesting to kind of go back through the trends from the past 10 years or so and just see how different social media is to what it was in 2012. So I hope that you have also enjoyed it. A lot of this video has been my personal opinions and my personal memories and experiences of social media over the years that I've been on it. So if there's anything that I missed, then let me know. As always, I encourage you to leave a comment with any thoughts that you might have. Leave a like if you did enjoy the video, and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. I will leave a couple of my other videos linked in the description if you wanted to see more of my content, but apart from that, I will hopefully see you guys in the next one. Bye guys!